Alonso Wheeler gave his credit card to a stranger in a grocery store. Not just any card, the kind with no limit, no questions asked. He told her she could use it for 12 hours, then walked away. By 3 a.m., his phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Transaction after transaction lighting up his screen. He sat up in bed, heart pounding, pulling up the details. And what he saw made him go completely still. Because it wasn't what she bought. It was what she didn't buy. And that changed everything. Before I tell you what happened next, I need to ask you something. Have you ever judged someone for being poor? Been honest. Have you ever thought, even for a second, they should just work harder, or they should manage their money better? Drop a comment and tell me yes or no. Because this story is about to challenge everything you think you know about poverty. And if it changes your perspective like it's changing mine while I tell it, hit that subscribe button. You'll want to hear how this ends. 24 hours earlier, Alonso had been on stage at a fancy charity event, drink in hand, explaining his theory to a room full of wealthy people. Poor people stay poor because they make bad choices with money, he'd said. Give them unlimited cash, and they'll waste it on things that keep them trapped. The room had nodded, agreed, applauded even. Then a woman stood up in the back. Her name was Sydney Montgomery, and she ran a community center in the part of town Alonso never visited. Her voice cut through the room like ice. Have you ever been poor? She asked. Alonso paused. Well, I grew up middle class. That's not what I asked. Sydney's eyes didn't blink. Have you ever had to choose between buying medicine for your kid or paying rent? Have you ever worked 3 jobs and still couldn't afford food? Have you ever been one emergency away from losing everything? The room went quiet. Alonso felt his face get hot. No, he admitted. But, then you don't know what you're talking about. Sydney's voice wasn't angry. It was tired. Like she'd heard this speech 1,000 times from 1,000 men in expensive suits. Poor people aren't bad with money. They're making impossible choices you've never had to make. Alonso's pride kicked in. His ego wouldn't let it go. Fine, he said. Let's test it. I'll give my credit card to someone who's struggling. Unlimited spending for 1 day. If they waste it like I think they will, you admit I'm right. If they don't, I'll fund your community center for 5 years. $2.5 million. Sydney stared at him. You're serious? Completely. Then pick someone tomorrow. Real person. Real struggles. And we'll see who's right. They shook hands while the room buzzed with shock. By morning, the bet was all over social media. #Billionaire bet was trending. News outlets were calling. This was about to get very public, very fast. Real quick, if you were Sydney right now, would you take this bet? Would you trust that a billionaire would actually follow through? Comment yes if you take the bet, and no if you think it's a trap. I'm curious what you all think. And if you're already hooked on this story, go ahead and subscribe because what happens next is going to blow your mind. The next afternoon, Alonso and Sydney walked into a grocery store in a working-class neighborhood. Sydney said people who were really struggling usually shopped midweek, when money was tight and paychecks hadn't come yet. They didn't have to wait long. A woman stood at the checkout with a sleeping toddler on her shoulder. The little girl's head rested against her mom's neck, mouth slightly open, completely trusting. The woman was counting money. Bills and coins spread across the counter. Her hands were shaking. $47.63, the cashier said softly. The woman counted again. Her lips moved silently. Then she looked up, and Alonso saw something in her face that made him forget about his board meeting, forget about the bet, forget about everything except the fact that this woman was about to break. I'm short, she whispered. I'm $8 short. The cashier's face softened with pity. Behind the woman, someone in line checked their phone loudly. Another person sighed. The woman started going through her bags, trying to decide what to put back. Her voice was so quiet Alonso almost couldn't hear her. Maybe the medicine. No, Hallie needs that. Okay, the bread. But we need bread. Maybe the peanut butter? That's protein though. She was talking to herself, but everyone could hear. It wasn't a normal shopping decision. It was math. Terrible, impossible math. Medicine or food. Medicine or food. The little girl, Hallie, stirred slightly, adjusting her grip on her mom's shirt without waking up. Her tiny fingers held on tight, like even in sleep she knew to hold on. I'm so sorry, the woman said again. To the cashier. To the people waiting. To the universe. I thought I had enough. I'm sorry. Pause for a second. If you've ever struggled to pay for groceries, if you've ever had to put something back at the register, if you've ever felt that shame, drop a comment and just say, I understand. You're not alone. Thousands of people watching this right now have been there. And if this moment is hitting you in the chest like it's hitting me, hit subscribe. Because this woman's name is Madelynn. And what she does with unlimited money for 12 hours is going to teach all of us something we desperately need to learn. Alonso stood there with his $1,000 suit and his expensive watch and suddenly felt very small. Because this woman was apologizing. For being poor. For existing. For taking up space in a grocery store line. Sydney leaned close to him and whispered, That's your test. You want to prove poor people waste money? There's someone who can't even afford $47 of necessities. Let's see what she does with unlimited wealth. Alonso's heart was beating fast now. This was real. This wasn't a theory or a debate or a thought experiment. This was a woman choosing between medicine and bread for her child. He walked forward. The woman looked up, startled, tears on her cheeks that she tried to wipe away quickly. I'd like to pay for your groceries, Alonso said. His voice came out quieter than he expected. And I'd like to offer you something else. Something that might sound crazy. The woman just stared at him, confused and scared and so tired. And in that moment, looking at her face and the sleeping child and the bills scattered on the counter, Alonso realized something terrifying. What if he'd been wrong about everything? What if the next 12 hours didn't prove his theory at all? What if they destroyed it? But it was too late to back out now. The bet was made. The cameras would be watching. And this woman, this stranger with $8 standing between her and feeding her daughter, was about to show him exactly what poverty really looked like. So here's what I need you to do. Before you hear what Madelynn bought with that unlimited credit card, I want you to guess. Comment below. Do you think she spent it on herself? Do you think she wasted it like Alonso believed she would? Or do you think she did something else entirely? Drop your guess in the comments right now. And if you want to see what actually happened, if you want to know what those 3 a.m. transactions were that made Alonso's blood run cold, you better hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because Chapter 1 drops next, and I promise you, whatever you're imagining, the truth is more powerful. The truth is going to wreck you. And it might just change the way you see poverty forever. Don't go anywhere. This story is just getting started. Alonso Wheeler's penthouse had floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the entire city. From up here, 30 stories high, people looked like ants. Problems looked small. Poverty looked like something that happened to other people because they made different choices. He'd worked hard for this view. That's what he told himself every morning while his coffee machine, the kind that cost more than most people's monthly rent, brewed his first cup. He'd earned this. Stanford degree. Smart investments. 60-hour weeks building his company from the ground up. Well, from his parents' investment up. But that was different. That was just seed money. The rest was all him. His intelligence. His discipline. His refusal to make excuses. Tonight was the charity gala for the Education Foundation, and Alonso was on the panel about economic mobility. He'd prepared his talking points carefully. He had data. He had charts. He had a theory he'd been refining for years about why some people succeeded and others stayed trapped. Poor people stay poor because of mindset, he'd tell his assistant during the drive over. It's not about opportunity. It's about discipline. About delayed gratification. About making smart choices instead of emotional ones. His assistant nodded politely. She always did. She was good at her job, which meant agreeing with him even when her face said otherwise. The gala was elegant. Crystal chandeliers. Champagne that cost $50 a glass. Women in dresses that cost more than cars. Men in custom suits discussing tax shelters and investment strategies. Everyone here had money. Everyone here had worked hard for it. Or their parents had. Or their grandparents had. But that didn't matter because they were all self-made in the ways that counted. During the panel, Alonso hit his stride. The poverty trap is largely self-inflicted, he explained to the nodding crowd. Give a poor person a windfall, a tax refund, a stimulus check, whatever, and watch what happens. Do they invest it? Do they pay down debt? No. They buy a new TV, new sneakers. They go out to eat. They make emotional purchases that feel good in the moment, but keep them trapped long-term. Applause. Agreeable murmurs. He was killing it. It's not about opportunity, Alonso continued, warming up. It's about discipline. Poor people receive assistance constantly. Food stamps. Housing vouchers. Free healthcare. And they still can't get ahead because they lack the fundamental skill of delayed gratification. Give a poor person unlimited money for a day, and I guarantee you they'll waste it on things that keep them poor. It's not systemic. It's personal. More applause. A few people actually stood up. Alonso felt vindicated. Righteous. Correct. Then someone in the audience stood up. Not to applaud. A woman in a dress that definitely came from a thrift store. Her hair pulled back simply. No jewelry except small earrings. She didn't look like she belonged here, and from the way people around her shifted uncomfortably, they knew it too. "Excuse me," the woman said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like ice. "I have a question." Alonso smiled the way he always did when someone challenged him during Q&A, confident. Ready. He'd debated plenty of people who disagreed with his theories. He always won because he had facts on his side. "Of course," he said smoothly. "Please, go ahead." The woman didn't smile back. "Have you ever been poor?" Actually poor. Not college student eating ramen poor, but genuinely poor. The question hung in the air. Alonso felt his smile tighten slightly. "I grew up middle class. My parents worked hard for everything we had." "Upper middle class," the woman corrected, and something in her voice said she'd done her research. "Your father was a marketing executive. Your mother was a lawyer. They owned their home, paid for your college, gave you seed money for your startup. You've never missed a meal you didn't choose to skip. Never rationed medicine. Never had to choose between electricity and groceries." The room went quiet. Uncomfortably quiet. Alonso felt heat creeping up his neck. "I'm sorry, who are you?" "Sydney Montgomery. I run a community center in Roxbury. And I'm tired of watching rich people theorize about poverty like it's a thought experiment instead of people's actual lives." Her voice wasn't angry. That was the thing that unsettled him. She sounded tired. Disappointed. Like a teacher watching a student fail a test they should have passed easily. "Have you ever had to choose which bill not to pay this month?" Sydney continued. "Have you ever skipped your own medication so your kid could have theirs? Have you ever worked 3 jobs and still couldn't make rent? Have you ever stood in a grocery store counting pennies while people behind you sighed like you were wasting their time?" Alonso opened his mouth. Closed it. "No," he finally admitted. "But that doesn't mean..." Then respectfully, "You don't know what you're talking about." Sydney's eyes didn't leave his face. "Poor people aren't bad with money. We're making impossible choices you've never had to make. Every single day, we're doing math you can't imagine. Which kid eats today? Whose medicine gets skipped? Whether we pay rent or keep the lights on. That's not irresponsibility. That's survival. And you standing up here calling it lack of discipline is insulting to every person grinding themselves into dust trying to keep their families alive on minimum wage." Someone in the audience coughed. Another person shifted uncomfortably. Alonso felt something unfamiliar crawling under his skin. Not quite shame. Not quite doubt. But close. "Look," he said, trying to recover control. "I understand emotions run high on this topic. But data shows..." "Data?" Sydney's voice finally had an edge. "You want data? I can give you data. I can give you spreadsheets of people budgeting better than any accountant you've ever hired. People who can stretch $20 for 3 days. People who know the price of every item in every discount store within bus distance. People who are better at resource management than you've ever had to be because the stakes are life and death instead of which stock to buy." The moderator tried to intervene. "Perhaps we should..." "No," Sydney said firmly. "Let me finish. You said give a poor person unlimited money and they'll waste it. You said it's human nature to be short-sighted. You want to test that theory." Alonso's pride kicked in before his brain could stop it. "Actually, yes. I would." "Fine." Sydney crossed her arms. "Let's make a bet. Right here. Right now. In front of all these people." The room erupted in whispers. This was not how charity galas usually went. "A bet." Alonso repeated. "You give your credit card, unlimited, no restrictions, to someone who's genuinely struggling. Not some middle-class person having a rough month. Someone actually poor. Let them use it for 12 hours. If they waste it like you think they will, I'll come on whatever podcast or news show you want and admit your theory has merit. But if they don't, if they prove you wrong, you fund my community center for 5 years. Full operational budget. $2.5 million. The crowd gasped. That was real money. That was commitment. Alonso felt every eye in the room on him. If he backed down now, he'd look like a coward. Like someone who talked big but couldn't back it up. And he was so certain, so absolutely sure that human nature under poverty would reveal itself exactly as he predicted. "Deal," he said before he could think it through. "But I choose how we find this person. We do it together. Tomorrow. Someone random. Someone neither of us know. Real struggle. Real choices. Sydney stared at him for a long moment. Then she walked down the aisle toward the stage. Held out her hand. Tomorrow morning. 9 a.m. We'll find someone together. And we'll see who understands poverty better. Someone who's lived it or someone who's theorized about it from a penthouse. They shook hands. The room erupted. Cameras flashed. By the time Alonso left the gala, #Billionaire bet was already trending on Twitter. News outlets were calling. His PR team was panicking. And Alonso was absolutely certain he'd just made the easiest $2.5 million bet of his life. What he didn't know yet was that 12 hours from now, his entire worldview would be lying in pieces around his feet. And the person who destroyed it would be a woman with $8 and a sleeping toddler, making impossible choices he'd never even imagined existed. The grocery store was busy for a Wednesday afternoon. Alonso stood near the entrance with Sydney, feeling out of place in his suit. Everyone else wore normal clothes. Jeans, t-shirts, work uniforms. People who'd come straight from jobs that paid by the hour. This feels wrong, Alonso muttered. Like we're hunting. We're not hunting, Sydney replied quietly. We're observing. People who are really struggling shop midweek when money's tightest. When they're trying to stretch what's left until Friday's paycheck. Alonso checked his phone. 9:37 a.m. His assistant had rescheduled 3 meetings for this. His board was asking questions. His PR team was drafting statements. The bet had gone viral overnight. Millions of people watching to see if the billionaire would be proven right or humiliated. There, Sydney said softly, nodding toward the checkout lanes. A woman stood at register 3 with a toddler sleeping on her shoulder. The little girl's head rested in that boneless way kids sleep, completely trusting. The woman was counting money. Bills spread across the counter. Ones, fives, quarters mixed in. Her hands were shaking. Alonso watched the cashier scan items. Generic diapers. Cheapest bread. Peanut butter. Ramen. A small bottle of children's medicine. Nothing fancy. Nothing extra. Just basics. 47.63, the cashier said gently. The woman counted again. Her lips moved silently. Then her face did something that made Alonso's chest tighten. Not crying. Worse. The moment before crying when you're trying desperately not to fall apart in public. I'm short, she whispered. I'm $8 short. Behind her, a man in a business suit checked his phone with exaggerated irritation. A woman sighed loudly. The universal sounds of people whose time is being wasted by someone else's poverty. I'm so sorry, the woman said again. To everyone. To no one. I thought I had enough. Let me put some things back. She started going through the bags with shaking hands. Trying to decide. The medicine was $12. The bread was $3. The peanut butter was $4. Everything was necessary. Everything was already the cheapest version available. There was nothing left to cut. Maybe the medicine, she said quietly. No, Hallie needs that. She's been coughing. Okay, the bread. But we need bread. Maybe, her, Sydney whispered to Alonso. That's your test. You want to prove poor people waste money? There's someone who can't even afford $47 of necessities. Let's see what she does with unlimited wealth. Alonso felt something uncomfortable twisting in his stomach. This wasn't theoretical anymore. This was real. A real woman. A real child. Real choices that shouldn't have to be choices. He walked forward before he could change his mind. The woman didn't notice him at first. She was too focused on the items, on the math, on the impossible equation of survival. Excuse me, Alonso said. The woman looked up. Her eyes were red. She tried to wipe her face quickly, like maybe he hadn't noticed she was crying. Like maybe she could pretend this wasn't happening. I'd like to pay for your groceries, Alonso heard himself say. The woman blinked. What? Your groceries? I'd like to buy them. And I'd like to offer you something else. Something unusual. The woman pulled her daughter closer. Protective. I'm not. It's not a scam, Sydney said, stepping forward. I promise. My name is Sydney Montgomery. I run a community center in Roxbury. This is Alonso Wheeler. He's a tech CEO. We have a bet about poverty and financial responsibility. He believes poor people would waste money if given unlimited resources. I believe that's ignorant. We'd like to give you his credit card for 12 hours. Unlimited spending. No restrictions. Then you return it. That's all. The woman stared at them like they were speaking another language. The cashier had stopped scanning. The people in line behind them had gone quiet, watching. This is a joke, the woman finally said. It's not, Alonso said, pulling out his Black American Express card. No spending limit. 12 hours. 6 p.m. tonight to 6 a.m. tomorrow. You can buy anything you want or need. We'll track the purchases, but there's no judgment. No consequences. You just use it however you see fit, then give it back. The woman looked at the card. At Alonso. At Sydney. At her sleeping daughter. Why? She asked. Why me? Because, Sydney said gently, kneeling down slightly to look her in the eye. You were about to put back your daughter's medicine to afford bread. Because you're exactly who deserves a break. Because I'm tired of people who've never struggled a day in their lives judging people who struggle every single day. Tears spilled down the woman's cheeks. Real ones now, impossible to hide. What if I mess it up? What if I prove him right? Sydney glanced back at Alonso, then back to the woman. Honey, there's no wrong way to meet your basic needs. That's what we're trying to prove. Slowly, like she was reaching for something that might burn her, the woman took the card. It was heavier than she expected. Solid. Real. Her daughter stirred slightly, adjusting her grip without waking. My name is Madelynn, the woman whispered. Madelynn James. And this is Hallie. Nice to meet you, Madelynn, Sydney said. Use the card however you need. No guilt. No shame. Just 12 hours where money isn't the problem. Alonso handed her his business card with his number. Call me when you're ready to return it. 6 a.m. deadline. They paid for her groceries. The $47.63 that had seemed impossible 5 minutes ago. Then they walked away, leaving Madelynn standing in the checkout lane holding a credit card that could change everything or prove every terrible thing she'd ever been taught about accepting help from strangers. The countdown started. 12 hours. Alonso checked his phone obsessively, waiting for the first transaction to appear. Waiting to be proven right. Waiting to win a bet he was suddenly, terrifyingly unsure he wanted to win. Chapter 4, the 12-hour countdown. Madelynn sat in her car in the parking lot for 20 minutes, just staring at the black card. Hallie was awake now, playing with a used tissue she'd found in the cup holder, making up some toddler game that involved folding it into tiny squares. Mama, why you sitting? Hallie asked. Just thinking, baby. Thinking what? About what we need. But that was the problem, wasn't it? They needed everything. Where did you even start when the list was endless and you only had 12 hours? Madelynn pulled out her phone, opened her notes app, started typing with shaking thumbs. Hallie's prescriptions. The ones she'd been carrying in her wallet for 2 months like lottery tickets she couldn't cash. The inhaler for her asthma. The antibiotic for her ear infection that kept coming back. The vitamins the doctor said she needed. Her mother's diabetes medication. The insulin she'd been rationing, taking half doses and lying about it. The doctor visit she'd skipped 4 months in a row because $40 might as well be $4,000. Rent. 2 months behind. Eviction notice taped to their door. Court date next Friday. Madelynn stopped typing. Her vision blurred. This list wasn't wants. This wasn't even normal needs. This was triage. This was emergency intervention for crises that should never have gotten this bad. Her phone said 9:47 a.m. She had until 6 a.m. tomorrow. 12 hours and 13 minutes of not having to choose who suffered less. She started the car. Pulled up directions to CVS. Her hands were still shaking. She kept expecting someone to stop her. To tell her there'd been a mistake. To take the card back and laugh at how she'd actually believed a stranger would just give her unlimited money. But nobody stopped her. The pharmacy was 3 blocks away. She parked in the loading zone because she didn't have time to find a real spot, and she was terrified if she let this moment pass, she'd lose her nerve entirely. Inside, the fluorescent lights were too bright. The air conditioning too cold. Everything felt surreal, like she was watching herself from outside her body. I need to fill prescriptions, she told the pharmacist. Her voice came out rougher than she intended. For Hallie James. She slid 3 prescription slips across the counter. The pharmacist looked at them, typed into the computer. These are pretty old. From March. You want all 3 filled? Yes. All of them. Please. That'll be about 20 minutes. Your insurance. No insurance. But I can pay. Those words felt foreign in her mouth. I can pay. When was the last time she'd said that and meant it? The pharmacist processed the order. Your total will be $127.82. Madelynn handed over the black card before she could think about it. The pharmacist swiped it. Somewhere, Alonso's phone was probably buzzing, logging the transaction, judging her choices. Let him judge. Her daughter needed to breathe. While she waited, Madelynn walked the aisles with Hallie on her hip. They passed toys. Hallie pointed at a stuffed elephant. "Mama, look. It's nice, baby. Can we get it?" Madelynn stopped walking. She had unlimited money for 12 hours. She could buy her daughter a toy. A simple, cheap toy that would make her happy. But something inside her recoiled. That wasn't what this was for. Toys were extras. Luxuries. Proof that poor people wasted money on non-essentials instead of being responsible. "Not today, baby. Maybe later." Hallie's face fell, but she didn't cry. She never cried when she didn't get things. She'd learned too young that asking was pointless. That broke Madelynn's heart more than the tantrum would have. The pharmacist called her name, handed over a white paper bag containing 3 months of Hallie's medicine. Medicine they should have had in August. Medicine Madelynn had been rationing and praying would last. "Have a good day," the pharmacist said with professional kindness. Madelynn made it to the parking lot before. She started crying. She sat in the car, clutching the prescription bag, her whole body shaking. Hallie patted her face with small, confused hands. "Mama sad." "No, baby. Mama's happy. Mama's just really, really happy." She pulled out the inhaler. The real one. Not the generic they'd been stretching. 3 months worth. Hallie could breathe properly now. Every night. Not just during emergencies. Not just when the wheezing got so bad Madelynn considered the ER. Every single night. Madelynn kissed her daughter's forehead over and over. "You're going to be okay now. Mama's got you. You're going to be okay." She checked the time. 10:23 a.m. 11 hours and 37 minutes left. Next stop, her mother's apartment. Meanwhile, in his office downtown, Alonso stared at his phone. Transaction alert. CVS Pharmacy, $127.82, 10:04 a.m. His assistant stood in the doorway. "Well, what did she buy?" "I don't know yet. Just the total. Could be medicine. Could be makeup. Could be anything. You want me to call the store?" "No." Alonso set down his phone. "We wait. We see what else she does." But something nagged at him. $127 at a pharmacy. That wasn't a splurge. That was measured. Specific. Maybe strategic, his brain offered. Maybe she knows you're watching. Maybe she's performing responsibility until she thinks you're not paying attention. Another alert. $892. Neighborhood Medical Center, 1:47 p.m. Alonso's certainty wavered. "A medical center?" his assistant said, reading over his shoulder. "In the afternoon? Maybe an emergency room," Alonso said. "Maybe she's gaming the system, getting unnecessary tests." But his voice sounded uncertain even to himself. Because $892 at a medical center didn't sound like gaming anything. It sounded like someone who'd been avoiding doctors because they couldn't afford not to. Madelynn's mother lived in a one-bedroom apartment in a building that smelled like old carpet and somebody else's cooking. Janet opened the door looking thinner than she'd been last month. Her hands shook slightly when she hugged Madelynn. Not from emotion. From blood sugar. "Mama, when did you last eat?" Madelynn asked, stepping inside. "I had toast this morning. I'm fine." "When did you last take your insulin?" "Full dose." Silence. That was answer enough. "Mama, it's expensive, Maddie. And you got your own bills." "I'm managing. The doctor said I could manage with diet if I'm careful." "The doctor said you need insulin." "Every day?" "Full dose." "You're not managing, you're dying slowly and calling it budgeting." Janet's face crumpled slightly. "What do you want me to do? Choose between my medication and helping you with Hallie? Between keeping my lights on and staying alive? These aren't choices, baby. These are just different ways to lose." Madelynn pulled out the black card. Held it up. "For the next 11 hours, we don't have to choose. Get dressed. We're going to the clinic." "Maddie, I can't afford, I can pay. Today, for 12 hours, I can actually pay. So get dressed before I lose my nerve, or this turns out to be a dream." The neighborhood urgent care was the kind of place that stayed open late because poor people can't take time off work for regular appointments. They waited 45 minutes. Hallie colored on the back of old intake forms. Janet filled out paperwork with shaking hands, checking no, under insurance and wincing. A physician assistant called them back. Young woman. Kind eyes. The look of someone who'd chosen this clinic specifically because it served people others ignored. She checked Janet's blood sugar. Her face went carefully neutral, which meant it was bad. "Ms. James, your glucose is dangerously high. When did you last see your regular doctor?" "April, maybe. I missed some appointments." "And your insulin?" Are you taking it as prescribed? Janet looked at her hands. I've been stretching it. Taking half doses. Making it last longer. The PA's professional mask cracked slightly. Ma'am, you can't do that. Diabetes doesn't negotiate. You're risking serious complications. Kidney damage. Nerve damage. Vision loss. I know, Janet said quietly. But I can't afford complications or insulin, so I picked the one that might kill me slower. The PA looked at Madelynn, then at Janet, and her eyes held the tired frustration of someone who had this conversation 5 times a day. Let me write you new prescriptions. Proper dosing. And we need to run some tests. A 1C, kidney function, full panel. You should have had these done months ago. The bill came to $892. Office visit. Lab work. Prescriptions for 3 months of insulin, testing strips, and adjusted medications. Madelynn handed over the black card without hesitating. Janet tried to stop her. Baby, that's too much. You can't, Mama. You've been rationing medication that keeps you alive so you could help me with Hallie. So you could slip me $40 here and there when you had it. Let me do this. Please. Just let me fix this one thing. They both cried in the exam room while the PA discreetly stepped out. When they left, Janet was carrying 3 months of insulin in a small pharmacy bag. 3 months of not choosing between life and rent. 3 months of actual full doses. On the drive back, they stopped at the 24-hour grocery store. The one with fluorescent lights and prices slightly higher than the discount stores, but open at 2 a.m. for people whose schedules don't fit normal hours. Madelynn filled a cart. Not with ramen and peanut butter. With real food. Fresh vegetables. Fruit. Chicken breast. Fish. Whole grain bread. The things her mother needed for diabetes management. The things Hallie needed for growing properly. Milk that wasn't the cheapest powdered kind. Eggs. Cheese. Yogurt. She watched the total climb on the little screen. $50. $100. $200. Every dollar felt like an accusation. Proof she was irresponsible. Proof poor people couldn't handle money. But she kept shopping. Because Hallie needed protein. Because her mother needed food that wouldn't spike her blood sugar. Because for 3 months, they'd been eating whatever was cheapest instead of what they actually needed to survive. The total came to $387.43. Madelynn's hands shook as she signed the receipt. She kept expecting someone to stop her. To say there'd been a mistake. To take back the card and the food and tell her people like her didn't deserve full carts. But nobody stopped her. They loaded groceries into her trunk. Her mother's eyes filled with tears looking at actual food. Real food. The kind that didn't come from food banks or dollar stores. How much time do you have left? Janet asked. Madelynn checked her phone. 8 hours and 17 minutes. What else do you need? Everything. She needed everything. New shoes because hers had holes. Hallie needed winter clothes because she'd grown out of last year's. They needed a working space heater because their apartment was freezing. She needed her car inspected before it was illegal to drive. The list was endless. But there was one thing that couldn't wait. One thing that would make everything else meaningless if she didn't handle it. I need to pay rent, Madelynn said quietly. Before we lose the apartment. Before the eviction hearing next Friday. I need to pay 2 months back rent or we're homeless. She pulled up her landlord's payment portal on her phone. 2 months. $1,400. The amount she'd been negotiating, begging, promising to pay in installments. Her landlord had been patient. More patient than he had to be. But patience had limits when you owned property and tenants weren't paying. She typed in the amount. Stared at it. $1,400. More than she made in a month working 3 jobs. More than she'd ever had at one time. She clicked submit. Used the black card. Watched the confirmation screen load. Payment accepted. 0 balance. No eviction. No court date. No packing their lives into trash bags and begging friends for couches to sleep on. They had a home. For now. For 2 more months. For long enough to breathe. Madelynn sat in the car outside her mother's building at 4:38 a.m. Hallie was asleep again. Janet was inside with food in her fridge and insulin in her purse. The sky was starting to shift from black to deep purple. Morning coming. 12 hours ending. She looked at the card in her hand. This small piece of plastic that had been everything for half a day. She hadn't bought clothes. Hadn't bought toys. Hadn't gone to restaurants or gotten her nails done or purchased any of the things Alonso probably expected. Just medicine. Food. Housing. The basics. The absolute bare minimum for survival. And she still felt guilty. Still felt like she'd done something wrong. Still felt like she had to prove she wasn't wasteful. She pulled out her phone and opened a new note. Started typing a list of every purchase with explanations. Not because anyone asked, but because poverty had taught her that help always came with judgment. That she'd always have to prove she deserved to be helped. At 5:30 a.m., she drove to Alonso's office building. The address was on his business card. She waited in the lobby with Hallie, exhausted beyond measure, holding the black card with both hands like returning something sacred she'd been trusted with. When Alonso walked in at 5:47 a.m., she stood up, her whole body shaking. "I didn't waste it," she said before he could speak. "I swear I didn't waste it. I kept all the receipts. I can explain every purchase. I know you probably think I bought something I didn't need, but I can prove everything was necessary. I can show you." Alonso looked at Madelynn standing in his lobby at dawn, exhausted and terrified, and felt something crack inside his chest. She was holding out his credit card like it was evidence in a trial, like she was already guilty and just waiting for sentencing. "Madelynn," he said gently, "you didn't have to come here this early. I said 6 a.m. You could have. I needed to return it in person. I needed you to see I was responsible. That I didn't. That I wasn't." Her voice broke. Hallie stirred against her shoulder, still mostly asleep. "I didn't waste it. Please believe me." Alonso took the card slowly. "I know. I saw the transactions. I know what you bought. Then you know I wasn't irresponsible." Madelynn's eyes were red, desperate. "Medicine for Hallie. Medicine for my mama. Groceries. Rent. That's it. Nothing extra. Nothing for fun. Nothing wasteful." And that's when Alonso understood what he'd actually done. He hadn't given her a gift. He'd given her a test she was terrified of failing. He'd made her spend 12 hours proving her humanity to a stranger who had no right to judge her in the first place. "Madelynn." He knelt down slightly, so they were closer to eye level. "You don't have to defend your choices. Medication isn't wasteful. Food isn't wasteful. Housing isn't wasteful. Those are basics. But I could have. I should have." She was spiraling now, exhausted and scared. "I made a list. I wrote down everything. I can show you why each thing was necessary. The inhaler was $94, but Hallie has asthma, and we'd been stretching one for 5 months. The insulin was for my mama because she's been taking half doses and her blood sugar was dangerous. The groceries were $387, but that's 2 weeks of actual food, not just ramen. The rent was $1,400, but we're 2 months behind, and we have an eviction hearing, and Madelynn." Alonso's voice was rough. "Stop. Please stop defending yourself. But you need to understand. I do understand. That's the problem. I finally understand." Alonso stood up, ran his hand through his hair. He looked like he hadn't slept. "You spent 12 hours addressing emergencies that should never have been emergencies. You bought medicine you should have had months ago. You fed your family food they should have been eating all along. You paid rent you should have never fallen behind on because your jobs should pay enough to cover basic housing." Madelynn stared at him. "What? You weren't irresponsible. You were." His voice cracked. "You were doing triage. You were managing a crisis I can't even imagine. And the fact that you're standing here apologizing to me, proving to me that you weren't wasteful, shows exactly how broken this whole system is." Behind them, Sydney Montgomery walked through the lobby doors. She'd been texting with Alonso all night, watching his messages shift from confident to confused to horrified. "Did you learn something?" Sydney asked him quietly. Alonso looked at her, then at Madelynn, then at the credit card in his hand. "I learned I've been wrong about everything that actually matters." He turned back to Madelynn. "Can I ask you something? And you don't have to answer. But I need to understand." Madelynn nodded, too tired to do anything else. "Why didn't you buy anything for yourself? Not one thing. Not coffee or new shoes or a meal you didn't cook." "What?" Madelynn looked at him like the answer was so obvious she couldn't believe he had to ask. "Because Hallie comes first. She always comes first. I can manage with what I have. I've been managing for 2 years. But she deserves better. She deserves medicine that works. Food that isn't expired. A home that's stable. Everything I bought was for making sure she has what she needs to be okay. And your mother? She raised me alone after my dad left. Worked 2 jobs so I could go to college. I didn't finish because life happened, but she tried. She gave me everything. Now she's rationing insulin so she can help me with Hallie. How could I not help her when I finally had the chance?" Alonso felt like he was seeing poverty for the first time. Not as a concept. Not as data. but as actual human beings making impossible mathematics work through sheer force of will and love. The medicine, he said slowly. You've been rationing your daughter's asthma medication. We had to. It's expensive. And your mother's been taking half doses of insulin. She didn't tell me until yesterday. But I knew. I could see her getting sicker. And you're 2 months behind on rent, even though you work 3 jobs. The jobs don't pay enough. And childcare costs more than I make. So my mama watches Hallie, but that means she can't work, which means she can't pay her bills, which means I help her, which means I fall behind on mine. It's not one bad choice. It's a whole system designed to make sure we keep falling. Sydney stepped forward. This is what I've been trying to tell you, Alonso. Poor people aren't bad with money. They're making calculations you've never had to make. Madelynn just did more complex resource management in 12 hours than most CFOs do in a year. She prioritized. She strategized. She made hard choices about competing critical needs. That's not irresponsibility. That's skill you don't develop unless you have to. Alonso pulled out his phone, opened his banking app, pulled up the full transaction history. CVS Pharmacy, $127.82. Neighborhood Medical Center, $892. 24-hour grocery, $387.43. Walgreens, $183.67. Apartment rent payment, $1,400. Total spent, $2,990.92. Out of unlimited credit. She could have spent $10,000, $50,000, $100,000. She'd return the card after spending less than $3,000. And every single purchase was survival. What's the Walgreens charge? He asked. Madelynn's face flushed. That was for Mrs. Chun. She lives next door. She watches Hallie while I work. She doesn't charge me because she can't afford childcare either, and she's lonely. But her arthritis medication is expensive, and she's been skipping doses. Her hands are getting worse. I hoped it was okay. She helps me so much. I wanted to help her back. Alonso felt something break completely inside him. You helped your neighbor. With money you had for 12 hours. Instead of spending it on yourself. She needed it. And she helps me. That's how it works when you're poor. You help each other because nobody else will. Alonso sat down on one of the lobby chairs. Put his head in his hands. His entire worldview was lying in pieces around his feet, and he didn't know how to pick them up. Sydney sat next to him. You thought poverty was about bad choices. But you just watched someone make better choices than you've ever had to make. Under more pressure than you've ever faced. With consequences you've never had to consider. And she still came out looking more responsible than most people with money. I was wrong, Alonso said. His voice barely audible. I was so completely, fundamentally wrong. Madelynn stood there holding Hallie, looking between them, still not quite believing this was real. So what happens now? She asked quietly. Alonso looked up at her. Now I try to fix what I broke. Not just for you. For everyone I've judged. Everyone I've dismissed. Everyone I've hurt with my ignorance. I don't understand. You will. Alonso stood up. Give me 24 hours. Meet me back here tomorrow morning. Same time. And bring a list. A list of everything you'd do if money wasn't the barrier. Not just for you. For everyone you wish you could help. Everyone you see struggling. Everyone who needs what you needed yesterday. Because you're about to teach me the most expensive lesson of my life. And it's worth every penny. Alonso didn't go home after Madelynn left. He went back to his office and pulled up the transaction history again. Stared at it like it was a foreign language he was finally learning to read. $127.82. CVS Pharmacy. He called the store. Asked what exactly had been purchased. The pharmacist couldn't give specifics because of privacy laws, but she said something that stayed with him. Sir, those prescriptions have been waiting since March. That little girl needed that medicine 4 months ago. For months. Hallie had been wheezing for 4 months, while her mother carried prescriptions she couldn't afford to fill. Alonso tried to imagine watching your child struggle to breathe and not being able to fix it. Couldn't. The math didn't work in his brain because he'd never had to do math like that. $892. Neighborhood Medical Center. He called them too. Same privacy walls. But the intake coordinator said something quietly. We see a lot of people delaying care. Skipping appointments. Rationing medications. It's not because they don't care. It's because a $40 copay might as well be $4,000 when you're choosing between that and keeping the lights on. Alonso thought about his own doctor. Concierge service. Same-day appointments. No waiting. No worrying. Just call and show up and someone fixes whatever's wrong. He'd never once thought about what healthcare looked like for people who couldn't afford to be sick. $387.43. Groceries. He looked at his own grocery bills from the past month. Organic everything. Imported cheeses. Steaks that cost $30 a pound. Wine that cost more than Madelynn's entire grocery run. And he never thought twice about any of it. Never added up the total before checkout. Never put anything back because it was too expensive. $183.67. Medicine for a neighbor who provided free childcare. Alonso had never even met his neighbors. Couldn't name a single person who lived on his floor. Didn't need to because he didn't need anything from them. But Madelynn lived in a world where survival meant community. Where helping each other wasn't charity. It was the difference between making it and going under. $1,400. 2 months rent. Alonso's mortgage on his penthouse was $11,000 a month. He paid it automatically. Never looked at it. Never worried. His parents had helped with the down payment. Called it an investment in his future. He'd called it being smart with money. Now he was starting to understand the difference between being smart with money and just having money. Sydney called at 7 a.m. Did you sleep? No. Did you? No. I've been getting calls all night. News outlets. Podcasts. Everyone wants interviews. Everyone wants to know if you learned your lesson or if you're going to double down and claim she was an exception. Alonso was quiet for a moment. She's not an exception. That's what I'm learning. She's the rule. And I've been judging the rule by exception standards my entire life. So what are you going to do? I'm holding a press conference this afternoon. I'm going to admit I was wrong. Publicly. On camera. And then I'm going to try to fix it. Fix what? Everything I can. At 2 p.m., Alonso stood in front of cameras and reporters and millions of people watching online. His PR team had tried to talk him out of this. Said he should let it blow over. Say it was a social experiment. Spin it. Control the narrative. He ignored them. Yesterday I made a bet, he started. His voice steady even though his hands weren't. I claimed that poor people stay poor because they waste money. I said give someone in poverty unlimited resources and they'd make irresponsible choices. I was wrong. Completely, fundamentally wrong. The room erupted with questions. He held up his hand. Let me finish. I gave my credit card to a single mother who was $8 short at a grocery store. She had 12 hours. Unlimited spending. No restrictions. I expected designer clothes. Electronics. Luxury items. Proof that poverty is about bad choices. He paused. Instead, she bought medicine for her daughter who'd been wheezing for months. Medicine for her mother who'd been rationing insulin. Food. Rent. And medicine for her elderly neighbor who watches her child for free. Total spent? Less than $3,000. Every purchase was survival. Every choice was tree-off. She managed resources better in 12 hours than I've managed them in 34 years. Because the consequences for her were life and death. Mine are just which stock to buy. Someone in the press pool shouted a question. Alonso shook his head. I'm not done. I built my company on advantages I didn't earn. My parents paid for Stanford. Gave me startup capital. I never missed a meal. Never rationed medicine. Never chose between rent and healthcare. I called myself self-made and judged people who didn't have what I had as lazy, as irresponsible, as lacking discipline. I was wrong. Success isn't just hard work. It's hard work plus opportunity plus safety nets plus luck plus 100 things I took for granted. He looked directly at the camera. I'm committing $5 million to Sydney Montgomery's community center. Not as charity, as restitution for every person I've hurt with my ignorance. And I'm starting a program focused on what poverty actually is, not moral failure, but impossible math. Not bad choices, but no good options. We're going to fund housing, healthcare, education, childcare. The things that should be basic, but aren't. The things that keep people trapped not because they're irresponsible, but because the system is broken. More questions. More cameras. Alonso answered them honestly. Uncomfortably. Without spin. When he finally left, his phone was exploding. His board was furious. His investors were panicking. Social media was split between people calling him a hero and people saying he was virtue signaling. He didn't care about any of it. That evening, he met with Sydney and Madelynn in a quiet office. Not his office. Neutral ground. Sydney's community center. I want to help, Alonso said. Really help. Not just write a check and feel good. Actually help. But I don't want to be a savior. I don't want this to be about me. So tell me what you actually need. Madelynn had brought a list, written on notebook paper in careful handwriting. She'd been up all night thinking about this. About what she'd do if money wasn't the barrier for once in her life. Stable housing, she said quietly. Not shelter housing with time limits and rules. Real housing I can afford on what I actually make. So we're not always one bad month away from being homeless. Alonso wrote it down. Education. I was in nursing school when I got pregnant. I had to drop out. I want to finish. Want a real career, not just 3 part-time jobs that don't add up to enough. Childcare. Good childcare. So Hallie can be safe and learning while I work. So my mama doesn't have to choose between watching her and earning money. Healthcare. Real healthcare that doesn't mean avoiding doctors until something's an emergency. She stopped, looked at her list, and help for people like me. Because I'm not special. There are thousands of us. Tens of thousands. All doing the same math. All making the same impossible choices. One person getting lucky doesn't fix that. Sydney added context. Housing costs have outpaced wages for 20 years. Childcare costs more than college in most states. Healthcare bankrupts 500,000 Americans annually. These aren't personal failures. These are policy failures. System failures. Alonso listened, took notes, asked questions. For the first time in his life, he wasn't theorizing about poverty. He was learning from people who lived it. Over the next 3 weeks, things moved fast. Alonso bought a small apartment building in Madelynn's neighborhood, renovated it, set up affordable housing, rent calculated as 30% of income, professionally managed. Madelynn got one of the first units. 2 bedrooms. Safe, clean, close to a good school. Her mother got another unit in the same building. Alonso funded Madelynn's return to nursing school. Books, tuition, supplies, living expenses so she didn't have to work 3 jobs while studying. He connected her with a subsidized childcare center his company partnered with. Good teachers, safe environment, educational programming. Hallie thrived. Alonso hired Madelynn part-time as a community liaison, paid her fairly, valued her expertise, because she knew more about poverty than any consultant he could hire. Together with Sydney, they created a community fund, not charity that people had to beg for. Systematic support that addressed gaps. Rent assistance, medical care, education, childcare, the things that actually helped. But Alonso did something else too. Something harder than writing checks. He listened. When Madelynn said a program wasn't working, he adjusted. When Sydney critiqued his approach, he didn't get defensive. When people with lived experience told him his assumptions were wrong, he believed them. He learned that being an ally wasn't about feeling good. It was about shutting up and following the lead of people who actually knew what they were talking about. 3 months passed. Alonso visited Madelynn's new apartment on a Saturday morning. Knocked instead of just showing up. Waited to be invited in. The apartment was modest, but lived in. Hallie's drawings on the fridge. Textbooks on the coffee table. Her mother's knitting in a basket by the couch. Madelynn poured coffee. Good coffee now, not the cheapest instant kind. And they sat at her small kitchen table. How's school? Alonso asked. Hard. Good. I forgot how much I loved it. Forgot I was good at science before life got in the way. And Hallie? Thriving. Her teacher says she's reading above grade level. The asthma's controlled now that we have consistent medication. She's just a normal happy kid. That's all I ever wanted. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Madelynn said something that made Alonso's chest tight. You know what the weirdest part is? Not choosing anymore. Not doing that constant math of who suffers less. I wake up and there's food in the fridge. Medicine in the cabinet. Rent's paid. Heat works. And my brain keeps waiting for the crisis. Keeps waiting for the bottom to drop out. But it doesn't. And that's so strange it almost hurts. You deserve stability, Alonso said. Everyone does. I know that now. I'm learning that. But for 2 years, I thought I deserved exactly what I had. Thought I'd failed somehow. Made bad choices. Wasn't disciplined enough. Your voice in my head sounded a lot like my own voice. That hit Alonso harder than anything else. I'm sorry. For that voice. For every person I made feel like poverty was their fault. Madelynn looked at him steadily. Then keep doing the work. Not just for me. For everyone still doing that math. Everyone still choosing who suffers less. Because I got lucky. You happened to be in that grocery store. You happened to be wrong in a way that could change. Most people don't get that. I know. That's what I'm trying to fix. Good. Because this isn't about you being a hero. This is about you using what you have to dismantle the system that gave it to you in the first place. 6 months after the bet, Madelynn stood in her bathroom wearing scrubs from her nursing clinical rotation. She stared at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. Not because she looked different, because she looked rested. That was new. No dark circles. No exhaustion carved into every line of her face. No constant calculation behind her eyes of what crisis was coming next. She could just be tired from studying. Normal tired. Not survival tired. Her phone buzzed. Text from Alonso asking if she had time to meet today. He'd been careful about boundaries. Never showed up unannounced. Never acted like he owned her time because he'd helped her. That mattered more than he probably knew. She texted back yes and finished getting ready. Hallie was at daycare. Her mother was at a doctor's appointment. A regular checkup, not an emergency. Normal life things that used to be impossible luxuries. At the coffee shop, Alonso looked uncomfortable. That was new too. The confidence he'd worn like armor at the gala had been replaced with something more uncertain. More human. I need your advice, he said after they'd ordered. About the housing program. We've got 50 families in units now, but I'm hearing some things aren't working. And I don't trust my own judgment anymore. I need someone who actually knows what they're talking about. Madelynn pulled out her phone. The laundry facilities. There's only one washer and dryer per floor. That's not enough for families. People are waiting hours. Missing work because they can't get laundry done. You need at least 3 per floor. Alonso typed notes. What else? The childcare stipend is too restrictive. It only covers licensed facilities. But a lot of us use neighbors, family, people in the community who aren't licensed but are safe and trusted. That needs to be flexible. The job training program requires 2 evenings a week. But most people working retail or service jobs don't have consistent schedules. They can't commit to Tuesdays and Thursdays. It needs to be modular, self-paced, online components. Alonso kept writing. This is exactly what I needed. You see things I miss completely. Because I lived it. You can't theorize your way to understanding what poverty actually looks like day to day. You need people with lived experience at every level of decision-making. Not just as tokens, as actual experts whose voices matter most. Alonso set down his coffee. Can I ask you something personal? Madelynn nodded. Do you ever resent me? For having to be the one to prove my theory wrong? For making you spend 12 hours justifying your existence? Madelynn thought about that. Really thought. Sometimes. Sometimes I'm angry that it took a billionaire's experiment to get stable housing. That my value had to be proven before I deserved help. That thousands of other women exactly like me are still doing that math because they didn't happen to be in the right grocery store at the right time. I'm sorry. I know. But sorry doesn't fix systemic problems. Action does. The question isn't whether you feel bad. It's whether you keep doing the work when it stops being a good story. When the cameras leave. When it's just boring policy work and budget meetings and listening to people tell you you're still getting it wrong. Alonso met her eyes. I'm not going anywhere. This isn't a project I finish and move on from. This is the rest of my life trying to undo the damage I did with my ignorance. Good. Because here's what you need to understand. Madelynn leaned forward. I got lucky. You gave me a chance. But I did the hard part. I survived 2 years of hell. I kept my daughter alive and healthy and safe on nothing. I managed resources like a CEO manages a billion-dollar company. I didn't need you to teach me responsibility. I needed you to remove barriers so my existing skills could actually work. I know that now. Do you? Because a lot of wealthy people want to teach poor people how to budget, how to make better choices, how to have discipline. We don't need that. We need living wages, affordable healthcare, childcare that doesn't cost more than rent, housing that's actually affordable. We need systemic change, not lectures about personal responsibility. Alonso absorbed that. Tell me what systemic change looks like. Specifically, because I can fund programs, but I can't change policy alone. Then use your platform. You've got access to politicians, media, other wealthy people. Stop letting them theorize about poverty. Bring in people with lived experience. Pay them for their expertise. Make them part of every conversation about programs that affect them. Advocate for higher minimum wage. For universal health care. For childcare subsidies. For affordable housing mandates. For all the things that would have kept me from needing your credit card in the first place. And when other wealthy people say poor people need to work harder, to make better choices, To pull themselves up, call that out. Publicly. Use your privilege to shut down that narrative every single time. Alonso wrote everything down. Then he said something that surprised her. Sydney's been saying I should hire you full-time. As director of lived experience for the foundation we're building. It would mean leaving nursing school. Better pay than you'd make as a nurse. More impact. But I wanted to ask you first instead of just offering. Because I don't want to derail your dream if nursing is what you really want. Madelynn sat back. Thought about 2-year-old Hallie sleeping on her shoulder while she counted pennies. About choosing between medicine and bread. About every impossible choice that had led to this moment. Can I think about it? Of course. No pressure. Whatever you decide, the nursing school funding doesn't change. Your housing doesn't change. Nothing changes except an opportunity if you want it. That mattered. The fact that he understood saying no was actually an option. That he wasn't holding her stability hostage to her decision. On her way home, Madelynn stopped at her old grocery store. The one where this had all started. Walked through the aisles slowly. Remembered standing at that checkout crying. Remembered the shame of not having enough. The fear that everyone was judging her. A woman stood at checkout now. Different woman. Same shaking hands. Same counting of bills. Same moment of realizing she was short. Same choice about what to put back. Madelynn's chest tightened. She walked over. Excuse me, she said gently. Can I help? How much are you short? The woman looked up, startled. Afraid. I don't. I'm not. I've been exactly where you are. Let me help. Please. Madelynn paid the difference. $17.32. The woman cried. Thanked her over and over. Madelynn handed her a card for Sydney's community center. If you need resources. If you need help. Real help, not judgment. Call them. Tell them Madelynn sent you. Walking to her car, Madelynn realized something. One person getting stable housing didn't fix poverty. One billionaire learning empathy didn't dismantle systemic barriers. But maybe, just maybe, enough people learning that poverty wasn't a moral failing. Maybe that could start to shift things. She texted Alonso. I'll take the job. But on one condition. We hire 5 more people with lived experience. Pay them well. Give them real power, not just advisory roles. And we never make another person prove they deserve help. Alonso stood at Sydney's community center a year after the bet, looking at faces he'd never have noticed before. Faces that represented lives he'd dismissed with theories and data points. Real people who'd been doing impossible math while he judged them from a penthouse. A year ago, I was an idiot, he said without notes, without polish. Just truth. I stood on a stage and said poverty was a choice. That poor people wasted money. That if you just gave them resources, they'd prove they didn't deserve help. I was wrong about everything. The room was packed. Media. Community members. People who'd been helped by the programs. People still waiting for help. Madelynn sat in the front row with Hallie and Janet. All 3 of them healthy now. Stable. Thriving. Madelynn James taught me what poverty actually is, Alonso continued. It's not laziness. It's not bad choices. It's impossible math performed daily by people with more skill and discipline than I've ever needed. It's choosing which child eats, whose medicine gets skipped, whether you pay rent or keep the lights on. It's surviving conditions that would break most people who've never faced them. He paused. I gave her unlimited money for 12 hours. Expected waste. Got wisdom. She bought medicine her daughter needed for months. Medicine her mother had been rationing. Food. Rent. Help for her neighbor. She spent less than $3,000, and every penny was survival. That's not irresponsibility. That's expertise I'll never have. Sydney stood up. Took the microphone. This isn't about one billionaire learning empathy. It's about systemic change. Alonso's using his privilege to dismantle barriers. But he's one person. We need policies that make his intervention unnecessary. Living wages. Universal health care. Affordable housing. Accessible education. A society where nobody chooses between medicine and rent. Applause filled the room. But Alonso knew applause wasn't the point. Action was. Over the past year, they'd housed 200 families. Funded education for 87 people. Provided healthcare access for over 300. Created job training that actually worked because people with lived experience designed it. Changed his company's policies. Living wage for all employees. Healthcare from day one. Childcare support. Education assistance. Paid family leave. He'd lobbied politicians. Written op-eds. used his platform to challenge every wealthy person who blamed poverty on personal failure. Lost some friends. Made new ones who actually mattered. After the event, Alonso walked with Madelynn to the parking lot. She was director of lived experience now. Made more than he'd offered because she'd negotiated. He'd been proud of that. Proud she'd advocated for herself. "You've changed," she said. "You don't talk like you used to. Like you have all the answers." "Because I don't. I'm learning that every day. Learning to shut up and listen. Learning that my job isn't to save anyone. It's to use what I have to remove barriers so people can save themselves." Madelynn smiled. "That's growth. Real growth. Not performative. Actual change." Hallie ran over, holding a drawing she'd made inside. "Mr. Alonso, look. I drawed you and Mama and me." The picture showed 3 stick figures holding hands. One labeled Mama, one labeled me, one labeled friend who helped. Not savior. Not hero. Friend who helped. "It's perfect," Alonso said, kneeling down. "Can I keep it?" "Yes. For your office." Later, alone in his car, Alonso looked at the drawing. Thought about the man he'd been a year ago. So certain. So wrong. So dangerous in his ignorance. He'd thought he was self-made. Realized now he'd just been lucky. Lucky to be born to parents with resources. Lucky to have opportunities. Lucky to never face the choices Madelynn faced daily for years. The work wasn't finished. Would never be finished. But maybe that was the point. Maybe dismantling systems of inequality wasn't a project with an end date. Maybe it was just the work. Every day? Forever. His phone buzzed. Text from Madelynn. "Thank you for being willing to be wrong. That's rarer than being willing to help." He texted back. "Thank you for teaching me. For being patient when you had every right not to be. For trusting me after I gave you every reason not to." 3 dots appeared. Then disappeared. Then appeared again. Finally. "Keep doing the work. Even when it stops being a good story. That's when it actually matters." Alonso looked at the community center in his rearview mirror. Thought about all the Madelynns still out there. Still doing impossible math. Still being told their poverty was their fault. He couldn't fix it all. But he could use what he had to help. And maybe if enough people with privilege did the same, used their advantages to dismantle the systems that gave them those advantages, maybe things could actually change. He drove home. Not to his penthouse. He'd sold that. Moved to a normal apartment. Still nice. Still comfortable. But not obscene. He'd donated the difference to the foundation. Didn't need approval for being less wealthy. Just needed to stop hiding from reality behind expensive walls. That night, he pulled out his laptop. Started writing. Not about himself. About the system. About policy. About what needed to change. He'd publish it tomorrow. Use his platform. Take the heat. Because Madelynn was right. The work mattered most when nobody was watching. When it wasn't a viral story. When it was just boring, unglamorous, necessary labor. He'd been wrong about poverty. Wrong about people. Wrong about what made someone worthy of help. But he'd been willing to learn. Willing to change. Willing to admit his entire worldview was built on privilege and ignorance. That had to count for something. Not redemption. He didn't deserve that. But maybe, just maybe, a chance to spend the rest of his life doing better. Being better. Using what he'd been given to help others instead of judging them. The drawing Hallie made sat on his desk. Friend who helped. That's all he wanted to be. Not a savior. Just someone who'd finally learned that poverty wasn't a moral failing. It was a system designed to keep people trapped. And the only moral choice was to fight that system. Every single day. For the rest of his life. He went to sleep that night thinking about Madelynn's words. Keep doing the work. He would. He promised himself he would. Because 12 hours and 4 purchases had taught him what 34 years of privilege never could. That the measure of a society isn't how it treats the wealthy. It's how it treats those with nothing. And America was failing that test. But maybe, one changed mind at a time, one dismantled barrier at a time, one policy shift at a time, maybe they could finally start to pass.